Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First things first, I would like to thank everyone who has taken time out of their day to come attend this event, and I would like to give a special thanks to our speakers today for joining us. Before we begin, I will give a quick introduction about myself. My name is Adil. I'm currently a full-time community college student and a HIBS graduate from Furqan Academy in Mount House. And I learned about Muhsin through one of my mom's friends who was a coordinator at MCA for the Muhsin organization. So, beginning with our presentation, uh, the question that many people have right now is probably what is Muhsin and what is their goals and mission? So, Muhsin is a nonprofit organization serving children and adults with any intellectual, mental, and physical disabilities. And Muhsin's aim is to establish a inclusive and accessible environment for individuals with disabilities and their families. And Muhsin takes an active part in many masjids across the country um, uh, to accommodate people's disabilities as well as special needs children and their parents. So, moving on, I will be playing a video by the founder of Muhsin, which is Imam Omar Sulaiman. And this video basically goes over what Muhsin does as an organization and how it can benefit us.
It was started with the idea of bringing disability awareness in our communities, but then making all of our massages, making all of our events, making all of our activities special needs friendly. And so now, alhamdulillah, we have hundreds of massages across the country, just over 5 years later, that now have special needs programs, that now have special needs facilities, providing sign language interpretations to talabats, lectures online, making sure that there are special needs Sunday schools and programs around the country, making sure that there is curriculum, providing respite care in different communities for parents with special needs. In some communities, even having an Eid prayer for families with special needs. This pandemic has taught us about what it was like to be disconnected from the masjid. SubhanAllah, so many families with children with special needs have never felt welcome in the masjid, have always felt like they don't have a place in the masjid. And we wanted to change that and come in about Rami with the support of the community that has happened. This is an organization that does so much great, that has changed the narrative around disability in our community. MUHSIN was the first organization that I founded that's near and dear to my heart, and it is a cause that is often neglected. So I ask you to please support it. If you see the blessing that comes about the change narrative, know that there were a lot of brothers and sisters that have been working towards this at a national level for a very long time. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to see those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminded our Prophet and reminded all of us by extension, and to do good by them, and to be counted amongst the Muslims. Allah is our faith, so right.
So if anyone has any further inquiries about Muhsin and what Muhsin does as an organization, you can contact Sister Rohi Ahmed, and her contact information will be shown at the end of this event. So a lot of people are asking, why does Muhsin matter and why should I care about it as a Muslim? So let's take a look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran regarding people with disabilities and special needs. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Nur, ayah 61, ليس على الأعمى حرج ولا على الأعرج حرج ولا على المريض حرج ولا على أنفسكم أن تأكلوا من بيوتكم أو بيوت آبائكم أو بيوت آبائكم أو بيوت أمهاتكم أو بيوت إخوانكم أو بيوت إخوانكم أو بيوت أخواتكم أو بيوت أعمامكم أو بيوت عماتكم أو بيوت عماتكم أو بيوت أخوالكم أو بيوت خالاتكم أو ما ملكتم مفاتحه أو صديقكم ليس عليكم جناح أن تأكلوا من بيوتكم أو أشتاتا فإذا دخلتم بيوتا فسلموا على أنفسكم تحية من عند الله مباركة طيبة كذلك يبين الله لكم الآيات لعلكم تعقلون. So the translation of this ayah is that there is no restriction on the blind, or the disabled, or the sick, nor on yourselves if you eat from your homes, or from the homes of your fathers, or from the homes of your mothers, or your brothers, or your sisters, or your paternal uncles, or your paternal aunts, or your maternal uncles, or your maternal aunts, or from homes in your trust, or the home of your friends. There is no blame on you eating or separately. However, when you enter the houses, greet one another with greetings of peace from Allah, blessed and good. This is how Allah makes His revelation clear to you, so perhaps you will understand. In this ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala clearly tells us that we should interact normally with brothers and sisters with disabilities and special needs. With that said, I would like to welcome to the stage Sister Noha Muhammad to read a hadith regarding those with disabilities. Sister Noha Muhammad is a member of the MUHSIN Mom Support Group and is a mother of a special needs child.
السلام عليكم. So Anas رضي الله عنه امرأة كان في عقلها شيء فقالت يا رسول الله إني لي إليك حاجة فقال يا أم فلان انظري أي السكة شئت حتى أقضي لك حاجتي فخلا معها في بعض الطرق حتى فرغت من حاجته. The translation is narrated on the authority of Anas, may Allah be pleased with him, that a woman, somewhat mentally defective, said, O Messenger of Allah, I have a need that I want you to meet. He responds, O mother of so and so, choose the way you like to walk in so I may know you need and meet it. He walked with her in some route until she had her need fulfilled. And from this hadith, our beloved Prophet Muhammad taught us acceptance, respect to people with mental disabilities, and taught us kindness and the best manners in treating others who are with difficult abilities, especially intellectual disabilities. And now back to Adam.
Thank Allah to Sister Noha for the hadith. And with that said, I would like to introduce our sisters for today. So we have Sister Noha al-Shubairi and Sister Hiba al-Haddad. So starting with Sister Hiba, she is a mental health practitioner at Khalid Center since its inception in the Bay Area. And she is also an affiliate of Stanford Muslim Mental Health Lab, which focuses on providing resources for clinic professions, researchers, and community leaders working with the Muslim population. And she has worked on promoting awareness on a wide spectrum of topics, ranging from anxiety to anger management through seminars, workshops, and lectures, and through her previous role as a mental health instructor at Hiba. Sister Hiba.
You need to speak.
Yeah, I'm a little worried. Okay, I'll do the best that I can. Everyone. It's such an honor and blessing to be here with you all, but especially because I would say this is my first time speaking with one of my long-term mentors and teachers, Sister Noha Alhamdulillah. And I know it's difficult to be here at this time, especially we're still in the pandemic, so inshallah may Allah protect you all and your families. So to begin with, we're talking about a very sensitive topic for today. And I will share with you a lot of what I've observed from my clinical experience in working with families and my specific population that I work with are college-age students. I'm sure Khadir can also provide much more sensitive clinical experience coming from children as well as teenagers. But, I'll start off with a story. One time I was at the park and I heard a mother speaking to her friend about her child. I haven't met her child, I don't know who her child is, but
she was speaking to her friend about her child, and she was telling her friend that, he just has one of those autistic traits. She was describing one of the qualities that her son has, and she was telling her friend that he just has one of those autistic traits. And I often see, is this better?
Yeah.
Okay. And I often see that autism is really described as an identity and not as a struggle, right? It becomes a full-blown identity of the person, right? So instead of someone who struggles with autism, you become that autistic person, right? And it grows with you into adulthood. And when you are described for marriage proposals or you're described for work opportunities, that is often one of the very first things that's mentioned about you, one of the very first characteristics that's described about you. So autism, when we think about it, what are the labels that are often given to individuals who struggle with autism? And some of those labels, I'm not sure, yeah, awesome. So some of those labels are that child is difficult, that child is not smart, they're unintelligent, they're a genius if they happen to have Asperger's syndrome, right? If they're aggressive, right? They're unpredictable, they can act out at any moment, and they're dangerous, right? A lot of the times I hear them described as such. They're emotionless, or they're loners, right? They don't like people, they don't like socialization, they don't like hanging out with friends. And all of these are not true to an extent, right? There are many myths about autism. And so many of these labels, right, and I avoid labels as much as possible, right? We just use them as a means of like describing a situation clinically. But a lot of these labels are not accurate, and they're very rigid in the way that they describe someone, right? So they're very problematic. But what is autism, right? And so when we come to think about autism as a word, as a term, as a descriptive, what is autism, right? So autism really is part of a collective, it's part of a group of disorders that have come to be known as autism spectrum disorder. And that, I know it says autism, right, in the name, but it's a spectrum. That's exactly what it is. We are on a continuum, we have a spectrum in which there are many different qualities and characteristics that someone may have, in ranging from intellectual ability to social abilities, right? So mainly, we're talking about intellectual and social abilities, right? And it can range anywhere from autistic disorder to childhood disintegrative disorder to pervasive developmental disorder, not specified, and Asperger's syndrome, right? And generally, the differences between autism and Asperger's is a form of autism, but it's on the higher end of the spectrum, and basically we describe those individuals as higher functioning, right? So in the sense that if you were to meet them in real life, you may never pick up on the fact that they are on the spectrum in the 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes that you've engaged with them. Now, unless you have a trained eye and you understand, right? You're trained in the field and you understand, you can pick up on certain things, right? That may be there in relation to social cues and the way that they relate to people. So autism is dispersed along the spectrum, and it's based on function, right? So how well functioning is the individual? Are they high functioning? Are they average? Are they moderate? Or are they low functioning? And we have a group within the autism spectrum that actually don't speak, right? So there are those individuals that struggle with speech. And so as you can imagine, socialization for them, engaging cognitively may be a really big challenge, right? But that is about 40% of those who struggle with autism, right? The rest, again, you may never be able to detect from engaging with them that they have autism. Right? The term spectrum, right, really speaks to the heterogeneity of the disorder. And that is, you may see someone who doesn't speak, or you may see someone who speaks very well, but they struggle socially. They have a really hard time making friends and keeping friends, right? Or you may see someone who is pretty recluse, like they don't really engage people very much, but they have the social and the verbal capacity to engage with people, right? So it's very difficult to say that it's one profile. It can never be one profile when you describe someone who struggles with autism. It can take on many different shapes and forms, right? And so it's important to keep that in mind. Now, how common is autism, right? How pervasive is it? You have about 1 in 54 children. In some statistics I saw 58. And in 2013 it was 1 in 88, right? So it's, perhaps we're getting better at managing the disorder, and of course early intervention is huge when it comes to autism. The sooner you intervene, the better the outcomes when they're adults, right? So as they age, if you intervene sooner, then the child has better chances at succeeding successfully, at getting married successfully, and sustaining a marriage, and having relationships, social relationships, friendships, right? And being able to sustain those friendships. And it affects more males than females. And we don't really know why, right? There really isn't an understanding yet as to why more males than females experience autism. Now, when we talked about the labels earlier, right, I want to really highlight this fact, because when you see a child who struggles with autism, it's very easy to think that they're out of control, that they're not raised well, right? This is a very cultural thing. Right? And he wasn't taught how to behave in public spaces. Doesn't have social skills. It's just unruly. It's just wild, right? This child is just wild. And this is often how they're described in school as well, right? I have friends who have children who struggle with autism, and the teachers describe them that way, right? And that's a tragedy, because educators are supposed to be on the team of the parents and supporting the child and not labeling the child and not limiting the child. But you want to expand that spectrum as much as possible and not define them, right? They're not a child who has autism. They're a child that, again, struggles with autism, right? So there are significant brain differences in children who are on the spectrum, right? So anybody who's on the spectrum, you will see either slight changes or very significant changes. And again, it's on the spectrum, right? No research has discovered a certain specific characteristic that relates to, like, if you see that characteristic, you would say, aha, they have autism, right? That doesn't really work that way. But you see a pattern, certain parts of the brain that are impacted that lead researchers to think that, okay, this is connected to autism perhaps, right? In relation to also how the child is relating to the world, right? And how they're relating to other people. So MRI studies show that those who struggle with autism have enlarged hippocampuses. And hippocampus is a part of the brain that mainly relates to memories, right? The recalling of memories, the storing of memories, right? And so there's a much larger hippocampus in those who struggle with autism than those who don't, right? And of course it varies. Some have slightly larger, and then some have moderate, and then some have significantly larger hippocampuses, right? So this also explains why children who struggle with autism have a hard time recalling things. So you've taught them something, and then they may forget and relapse easily. And then you're frustrated as a parent or as an educator because you're thinking, well, I spent all this time teaching them this. Why are they regressing? Well, maybe because there's something biologically there that limits them, right? That doesn't really give them that flexibility to retain memories easily, right? Second thing is, some who have autism have a smaller amygdala, right? The amygdala is really the hub of emotion in the brain. And it relates mainly to 3 emotions, right? Anger, fear, and sadness. Those are the 3 main emotions that relate to the amygdala in the brain, which we label it as like the hub of emotions, the center of emotional processing in the brain when it comes to fear and threats and things like that. And sometimes if someone is overactive in their anxiety, there's also MRI studies that show that perhaps the amygdala is slightly compromised. Maybe there's something going on there, right, that researchers have to look further into, right? So some have smaller amygdalas, so that kind of indicates as well that regulation with emotions is a struggle. Because when I have a larger amygdala, I have more capacity to regulate emotions, to control myself, right, as a child. But if I have a smaller amygdala, I'm slightly compromised. I'm slightly compromised biologically, right? Physiologically, it's more of a struggle for me to be able to manage my emotions and then also transition emotions. So for us, it's hard enough for adults, right, to go from being angry to de-escalating and being calm. Now, if you can imagine a child who doesn't have the skills, has perhaps a slightly compromised amygdala, and an enlarged hippocampus, how difficult it is, even more so, for the child to be able to control themselves. So that's why when they have big feelings, right? A regular, like a neurotypical child, a child with typical brain features, right? That's really what I mean by neurotypical, is able to de-escalate pretty well, right? With the help of a parent, with the help of someone to co-regulate with them. Right? In the presence of someone who's calm, they can calm and de-escalate themselves as well, right? But with a child who is slightly, has a slightly different brain structure, it becomes even harder, it's even more challenging. And it's very frustrating for the parents as well, because the parents, especially when they're in public spaces, I don't know if anyone here has ever dealt with a child who has tantrums. So my second born, I didn't really have this problem with my firstborn, but my second born, I definitely experienced that. And that's when I turned to positive discipline in a Muslim home, right, for how to handle these situations, right? But when you're in a public space and your child has a tantrum, that's embarrassing enough, right? And I recall times in which I packed up everything and just went back home, right? I was like, we're calling it a day. And to not burden other people and to not, cause a disturbance for other people, right? And then, of course, with time, the child learns how to regulate. We work on that, we speak about it, we model it. And then the child becomes much better equipped to be able to regulate their own emotions. I speak to parents who have children with autism. And subhanAllah, the struggle of the parents, they oftentimes struggle with severe depression, in the sense that I feel alone in this struggle. Nobody really relates to my experience, right? And every time I go to the masjid, which is supposed to be their safe space, they're supposed to come to the masjid for solace, for support, for spiritual reminders that can really uplift you and keep you grounded. If every time I come to the masjid, people are staring at me, people are giving me dirty looks, people are even remarking and making comments about, why don't you just stay home until your child is a little bit older? Well, because when I'm home, I'm by myself and I'm alone with my thoughts, and that's not very healthy for me, because your thoughts are not often, they're not true. They don't depict reality, right? They lie to you very often, right? And we have this concept of nafs al-shaytan and nafs al-rahman, right? So we have nafs al-shaytan that whispers to you that you're such a bad parent, you can't keep your child under control, you're not doing a good job, maybe if you were this or that, your child would be better, would be more advanced, would struggle less, right? All of these lies that shaitan whispers to you because he loves, his currency is despair. He loves the language of despair, right? So he feeds you and fills you with despair. And you're alone and you don't have support, and every time you go out, you feel like you're burdening people, people are looking at you, people are commenting about like, what's wrong with your child, why can't you get it together? And so you feel like it's just better for me to stay home and save myself the embarrassment. Save myself the shame and humiliation that I experience when I'm in public spaces with others, right? And so I won't go through every part of the brain structure that's different, right? You can see it on the slide. But this just kind of gives you a brief picture as to this is much more than just a behavioral problem. This is also a biological problem, right? That's very deeply rooted, and there aren't easy solutions for it. Right? What does life look like with autism spectrum disorders? Right? If you look at children in a classroom, probably would not be able to pick up on the fact that there's any child there that has a disorder, right? That's how it just, all the children, there aren't any markers on the child that really make the child salient, right? That really makes the child stand out, and I'm able to immediately identify this child has this disorder or that disorder, right? However, when you start working with the child as an educator, right, or of course as a parent, you know, when your child starts beyond the ages of they say 12 months to 3 years, that is when you start to notice signs and symptoms that the child is not doing certain things developmentally. They're not on the trajectory of neurotypical children, right? Children with normal, normative brain structures, right? So their learning and thinking and problem solving are different, you know, right? They're atypical. They're a little bit different than children who are neurotypical, right? So they're neurodivergent, right? So we have differently abled groups of people that think differently, problem solve differently, and perceive the world very differently, right? And so why that is because their processing of sensory information is significantly slower than a neurotypical child, than a child with a normal, unchanged brain structure, essentially. And so when they walk into a space, and there's like a space like this, and there's kids in the back, you know, walking around, and there's people talking, and there's different sounds. For them, they don't process things immediately. As soon as they walk into a space, they can't process things right away. So for us, we walk into a space and we're like, oh, we know what's going on. There's talk, and there's people sitting down, and there's this happening and that happening. But for a child who's slower processing, they walk into a space and they're so confused. And the immediate emotion that they receive, or that, you know, that they connect with, is one of fear. Because confusion is oftentimes associated with fear. I don't know what's happening to me. I don't know what those sounds are. People are talking all over the place, and I can't figure out that there's an event, that there's a talk, right? That there's something happening that's normal. So to them, everything feels abnormal. It feels scary. Sounds are amplified. I can't really make sense of things, like what's really happening here, right? And so this is why overly stimulating environments are not very good for children who struggle with autism, especially when they're younger and they're still learning the skills, the social skills, and how to adjust and how to adapt, and having an adult where they can model with, right? So they also have trouble talking about their feelings and putting themselves in the shoes of other people. So empathy, it's not that they don't have empathy. So you'll often hear this about those who struggle with autism, they lack empathy. And I've read that in so many places, and it's really ridiculous. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates everybody with a degree of empathy. Now, however, the problem is their expression of empathy is the problem, is where the challenge is. They may not express empathy in the way that you and I might, right? And so they feel it, but they don't quite know what to say. They don't have the right words to match the feeling. And so they don't exactly also know what to do. So my friend, for example, her child will, saw a certain situation happen in which another child was sad. And she was able to identify that the child was sad, and she went to the other child and gave them a side hug. So that's an expression of empathy, right? But she just didn't know how to verbally communicate anything to her friend, right? But the feeling, the emotion is there, right? I also deal with college students who have Asperger's, right? So far, my experience with college students has mainly been with Asperger's, so they're high functioning. And I was able to advocate in a specific place to have certain accommodation plans for these students, because to also embrace neurodivergent students, not just neurotypical students. And that allowed them the ability to stay at the institution in which they were at, because normally they would have been dismissed, right? So what the accommodation plan provides or gives them the ability to do is for us to be on equal footing. But I just have more tools than you do. Maybe you don't need as many tools as I do. But I provide you with note-taking services. I provide you with, we have sessions every single week, right? and the student does reality testing with me. So they talk to me about their experience. I think this professor is upset with me. Okay, so that may very well be the case, but it also may not be the case. Can you tell me what led you to arrive at that conclusion? And so it's dissecting their experiences and teaching them. You know, it kind of sounds like the professor was just trying to teach you a lesson. But the professor has no issue with you whatsoever. The professor likes you. There's absolutely nothing that you did that's problematic that would cause the professor to not like you, right? So it's a lot of times it's breaking down social situations and then teaching them how do you react in those situations. What's appropriate? What's not appropriate? Because a lot of times they'll blurt out things and the things that they say are well-intentioned, but they may not be socially appropriate, right? So we talk about what's appropriate and what's not appropriate and how to model that, right? We model that. And applied behavioral analysis, ABA therapy. It's a form of therapy that is used with children who struggle with, spectrum disorders. And something that's called ABC, I believe it's ABC, a form of therapy, right? It's ABC sequence, in which you have an antecedent, you have like a situation in which you model for the child. So I take the child to the door, and then I say the word open, right? And then I go ahead and I open the door in front of the child so that the child understands, oh, that's what it means to open something. So when I want to open something, it's called open, and then I push the door open. And then there's the consequence. They're able to get through the door and get into another space, right? So this is part of the therapy that is provided early on, ideally, right, for the child, so that the child struggles much less when they get older, because many of the social situations that they're in are already familiar, right? They tend to have obsessive tendencies, so you might find them repeating things, statements, behaviors over and over and over again. And for some parents, this can be very disturbing because they might be hitting their head against a wall repeatedly when they're upset. They're just rocking nonstop, and you can't really stop them. And they get more agitated when you try to stop them, as opposed to just sitting with them and perhaps rocking with them and then slowing down the rocking, right, until you get to a point where, okay, this is how I de-escalate my emotions, right? A lot of times they struggle with delayed speech and language skills, but not always, right? Sometimes that process is very quickly, but a lot of times it doesn't, right? They may flap their hands, right, or spin in circles, and they also don't understand jokes and sarcasm. So you have to be literal in your speech, right? And you have to have a certain prosody of speech, right? In the sense of when you speak to them, just be clear, and don't be sarcastic, don't joke around in a way that they may not really understand. And they also really thrive on predictability and routine. Now, as Nuran mentioned earlier, mashallah, Anas radiallahu anhu, when he was speaking and describing the situation in which the woman who was struggling with mental illness, and she went to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and she told him, I have a need, I have a haja, and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said, take me wherever you would like to take me, and I will go with you. Right? And this is a very beautiful concept, because this should be our response. When I'm unclear as to what the situation is, I can ask questions. And oftentimes I've noticed that when you just ask, is everything okay, right? Then the parents will oftentimes tell you, I'm sorry, my child is autistic, and I'm just waiting for them to calm down. That's all you need to say. Is everything okay? I don't need to ask intrusive questions. I don't need to say, what's wrong with your child, right? I don't need to make them feel worse about their ibtila more than they already feel, right? And so they already feel that humiliation, they already feel that shame. I don't need to exacerbate it. And oftentimes as a community, sensitivity is not really our strength. And so we need to become better at that, right? Not asking very intrusive questions. Also, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, right? He followed it in the prophetic model in asking the rulers of the provinces around the surrounding areas, right? And asking for the names of all the individuals who have chronic illnesses and who are blind or who are crippled or have certain types of disabilities, right? That prevented them from salah, prevented them from prayer. Right? So prioritizing prayer, but also making it easily accessible for those who struggle and who have disabilities. Right? So he thought of them, they were thought of, they were taken into consideration. And then he would provide them, right, with a servant or someone to care for them, to help them to be able to fulfill their duties. So this is a thoughtful community, an ummah in which if one part is hurting, we all are there to sort of support each other and to be there. And if all I can do is just be there with you, but I can't really do anything, at least my presence, my empathic presence, can go a very long way. Okay? And now I'm going to hand it over to Sister Noha, who will get into the role plays and any other demonstration.
Jazakallah khair. Hiba, you want to take questions, Hiba? Do it after? Okay. You can hear me? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. طيب اوكي بسم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله كما ينبغي لجلال وجهه وعظيم سلطانه والصلاة والسلام على أطيب المرسلين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. Adil, brother Adil read to you the ayah from Surah An-Nur. And I wonder if you actually, can you put it up on the screen, the ayah? Ayah 61 from Surah An-Nur. And I wonder, when you read it in the Quran, what came to your mind whenever you come across this ayah? Because this is a very intriguing ayah, subhanAllah. And I went because I wanted to understand what was the reason that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually revealed this ayah to the Muslim Ummah. And so there were several opinions or several narrations about why it was revealed. One of them by Dhahab, and he said that before Islam, the Arabs would actually not sit and eat with the blind and the disabled and anyone who had a problem, because they had, they were like, felt like, okay, no, we can't be with them. We are better than them. So there was some sort of marginalization and isolation of anyone who struggled with any problem. So this was before Islam. And then beautifully, Quran celebrates everyone in the Muslim community who might be struggling with a problem, whether big or small, and invites every single one of them into the homes of people. And look how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran is narrating, look at all these different homes that are mentioned in the ayah. And it's not only relatives. Like it ends by talking about friendship. Yeah, what a beautiful welcome and what a beautiful celebration of every member in our community. So this is one explanation of the revelation of the ayah. The other one is by Siddi. He says that men at that time, they would go into the homes of their relatives, the homes of their friends, okay? And the women of the homes would serve them food and drink, but then the men would refrain from eating or drinking because the man of the house wasn't there. And in this ayah, Allah is giving them permission that if you go into the home, you're served, you can, even if the owner or the man of the house is not there, you can feel free to go ahead and eat. In another narration or another tafsir of this ayah, it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah An-Nisa, ayah Raham 29, He said, O believers, do not devour one another's wealth illegally, but rather trade by mutual consent. So the companions, when they heard this ayah, they said to themselves, well, the best of wealth, and I want you to think about it at that time, the best of wealth is food, is to have food. And so they said, so we are not going to eat with anyone who might have a problem. We're not gonna eat with the blind because the blind cannot see his food. We're not gonna eat with the person who's disabled because he might have a problem getting to the food. So because they were so worried about eating with anyone who had a problem, and kind of in a way taking away from their portion or from what is offered to them. So the ayah was revealed that no, don't have any restraint. Go ahead, don't refrain from eating with people who have problems, but we invite you to have mercy. We invite you to actually do your part in taking care of them while they are in your midst. Let me see. I wanted to say, and then there is another portion of the ayah where before Islam, they used to feel embarrassed if they're eating alone, and people, if they were to make food, they would go around, until they find someone and invite them so that they can eat together. And this ayah was the permission that no, go ahead, you can eat alone. You do not need to always eat in the company of other people. You don't need to invite people so you can feel okay with eating. Anyway, I just want you to reflect about this beautiful ayah, about the celebration of every single member of our community, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam invites us to be welcoming, to be compassionate, and to accept people as they are. Just like Hiba was talking to you. It's all about acceptance. It's all about having mercy and compassion, and not judging people. So we're going to go ahead and do a role play. So I would like to have anyone who has a special need child who is willing to volunteer to be the mother of a special need child in this role play. And if anyone is willing to role play a special need child. So these are two people so far. Okay, one to be a mother or a father, and one to be the person who has special needs. And then I need 8 other people who are willing to be parents in the community. So let's see, who's willing to volunteer? Okay, if you're willing to come, please come up to the stage. Come. So we need 10. We need 10 people. 1 mother, 1 child, 1 to be a child, and then 8 other parents. Yes, come up here. Yes. Yeah. Okay. How many, mashallah, we have now? Mashallah. Okay, you were given this one. Okay, let's see. Okay. Do we have 10? Yes? I think we need 1 more.
Pay your 1% listing fee.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, who's willing to be the mother of the special needs child? Okay, Noha. Okay, who's gonna be the role playing the child of special needs? You are? Okay, Mumtaz. Mumtaz, very good. Excellent. You all are going to be mothers, right? Okay. So let's begin. Okay, can you take one and pass? Okay, Habibti, Noha, come and sit here. Yeah. Okay. This is gonna be very hard for you.
That's fine, yeah.
Okay. وانت حبيبتي تعالي جنب نور. Okay. طيب. I don't know. Like, I need to have you here so they can see your face, maybe. Have you here? Okay. Okay. Yes. Jamama. Jamama. Okay. So now this is Yeah, we can, no problem. Does that work? Yeah? Okay, they want us to go down and do it here in front of Yeah, we can, no problem. Let's go. Yeah? Okay, they want us to go down and do it here. Yeah, we So this is the scenario here. You all read your statements. Do you have any questions about them?
Yeah, thank you.
You are going to. We're gonna do this first, okay? And then we are going to do healing. We are going to heal. Okay, yes. Okay, so this is the situation here. So Noor is in the masjid, praying with her daughter, and her daughter is struggling with autism. Okay, so let's choose one. Okay, you've heard people talking about autism. Do you know someone who's struggling with autism?
And her other son, like I think two sons.
Okay, can you think about maybe something they did, something in the behavior? And so you can roll for things.
When I was young, I used to try to play with her sometimes.
Okay. So you were school. Okay. Speak in a low voice just so we also can hear the statements. Okay, so Noor and her daughter who struggles with autism are in the masjid, in the area where the mothers with children are, so not in the general musalla. Okay? She is in the area where only mothers and kids are allowed. Okay? And we have different mothers coming.
Yeah, for now, yeah. Yeah, just leave it there.
Okay, so you guys are gonna go and come to Noor one by one. Okay? Be ready, guys. I just want you to reflect what's coming up for you as you are watching this role play. And the same thing with all of you here. What's coming up for you as you're saying this statement? And Noor, what's coming up for you? What's your name? Sham? Sham. And Sham, also what's coming up for you as this is going on? Okay? Good. Yeah, let's start.
I did not pray because your child was making loud, weird noises. Please pray somewhere. Excuse me, sister, please just give your child more attention. She's acting out just to get your attention. Please.
Can you please stop it here? Can you please stop? Can you stop?
Your kid was so distracting. Why don't you play at home? Your kid doesn't have it. Just overreact.
Your kid is so disrespectful. Look at him when I talk to her. She puts her fingers in her ear. Discipline her.
My kid does the same thing. Do you mean my child is autistic too?
Okay. So let's hear from Noor. What was coming up for you, Noor, as you were listening to all these lovely non-inclusive statements?
So the first one, stop it. Yeah. So the first one, stop it is giggling. If I know how to stop it, I will do it. I will do it. I hope you stop it. Same as you need. Why did you bring home? Because I feel lonely. I need to be outside. He needs to see. He needs to feel included in some place. Yes, they are acting out, but their behavior is different, but they love being in a big community where they can see children around them. And they can start feeling belong and start simulate. They simulate lately. but they will do it. But if they are home, they will be depressed. My mom will be depressed. All of us will be depressed.
So what kind of decisions do you want to make?
Not me to the hospital.
Okay, so now, okay, now these statements, would you say this was the prophetic way of responding to members of the community? Is this how the prophet would have handled this particular situation?
No.
What do you think? I can't hear you guys.
No.
He would not have handled it this way. So we're going to do another round now, hopefully, to actually, inshallah, bismillah, give examples of how the Prophet ﷺ might have handled this particular situation. Okay, whenever you're ready. So it's the same situation. Mother in the musalla for mothers and kids, and the child is screaming or giggling, and we have different statements now. Okay, yes, that's it.
I can see that he has a hard time with some situations. It must be hard for you.
MashaAllah, your child has a beautiful smile. May Allah bless him and you. May Allah bless you for all the effort, time, and love you put into your time.
I feel frustrated by how my son behaves sometimes. I can just imagine how it's. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Maria. My son is Ismail. We would like to know your son. Maybe introduce them to each other? Assalamu alaikum. I appreciate that you're bringing your son to the masjid to be part of our community. MashaAllah, your kid is such a happy kid. Assalamu alaikum. It is great to have you and your son with us. Okay, did we get all of you there? Yeah? Okay, so let's hear from Noha.
Yeah, now I feel welcome.
You feel welcome.
Yes, because actually the kids, when they feel, they are happy. Most of the time they are happy. They actually, most of the time are happy in the situation that it's not supposed to be. They are supposed to calm down, but they are happy. They are so energetic. They are so enthusiastic. They actually see the word in a dreamy way, in their own dreams, and their dreams usually have. So yeah, they are happy. I remember when I went to support group one time. It was not in the masjid. It was a host group. And when someone told me, "Oh, your son is so happy," and I said, "Oh, I didn't see it that way." It's the first time I can see that my son is happy. I'm feeling that what he's doing is struggle and I need to stop. But when I said, "Oh, he's happy," he is happy. So thank you for reminding me that there is a part of the cup that is filled, and the other cups we need to improve it. So yeah, let's feel more welcoming. Kids will love to have friends. They don't know how to reach out to them, but when they are reached out to, they go right away, playing and having fun. And they actually, when they laugh, they say they laugh. They say it in a very enthusiastic way. Sometimes for people's not they feel it right away. So yeah, this way I think he'll be welcome. We can bring him again, and he actually will calm down because he will feel that this is a safe environment. This is a place where I am welcome. My mom's not always on tension because they feel it. When the mom is on tension, the kids with disabilities feel it, and they feel bad about themselves. They feel that they are the reason mom is sad, and they hate themselves at the end. Some of them actually commit suicide that day. So to help the kid, especially help the mom, feel her accepted, give her acceptance, and give her child acceptance, and he will improve this way, way better.
the first time the mother spoke, it was pretty like underwhelming for me, and it was pretty upsetting and disappointing. But the second time, I felt like I really was welcome, even though I had a disability, and I felt like I was appreciated as who I am.
Oh.
MashaAllah. Big clap for Shah. Okay, now let's hear from you mothers. What came up for you as we were doing this exercise? Anyone?
I have seen the situations when I came to MCA. Sometimes people used to bring the kids, so that time what I feel is, let us take, we are doing 2 rakats or 4 rakats or 20 rakats. We can take in turns, like that mother can pray first, and I can take care of her kid, and I can pray next, so that she can take care of both the kids. So that both can be able to take the prayers, do the prayers, and also we can help each other, even though we don't know each other. So like that I have did and I have practiced also. That way, we may miss the benefit of praying with everyone, but Allah knows our inner thing. We are helping another mother to pray. That is more important, right? So that's what I'm thinking. That's what came to my mind also. So they have to definitely bring the kids to the prayer, to the masjid, to everywhere, so that we know as a mother how to help them.
Yeah, mashallah. That's very good.
I think that it felt uncomfortable for me to say those things, but the sad thing was that that's not like we're pretending, but it's not something uncommon in our community. The masjid has always been my safe space and somewhere that I grew up having people that I love and people that I met that shaped who I am, and the fact that other people just because they have a disability were not able to experience that or currently are not able to experience that. And like you said, even for the mother herself, the message is, it has to a lot. I mean, it's the place where you meet your people, you meet your community. I think it's really about perspective. If you think about how, if you yourself would be like, be treated this way, and if you treat other people with such disdain, that's the number one un-Islamic thing. Our deen is about khuluq, and it's about character, it's about treating others well and with respect, and that is the most un-Islamic thing anyone could even do.
MashaAllah.
I appreciate you for volunteering. Thank you. Thank you. Can we give them a big Any questions? Okay. Oops.
Jazakallahu khairan to Sister for the wonderful speeches. Yeah, they were very informative and they really depicted what it's like for parents and autistic children and what autistic children feel like. So, I'm sorry I wasn't able to do a formal introduction for you.
No, you don't need to do it now.
So the last thing we have for this event is a Q&A session. So if any parents have any questions for Sister Noha, please raise your hand. I can bring the mic, or we have more cards that we'll pass out and bring your questions out there.
guys give any experience so that we can be trained and then we can come and volunteer to volunteer of special kids?
I was going to say some of these questions are probably best answered by our seasoned mothers who have gone through the experience and who know the resources well. So we may not be the experts necessarily, I don't think to be an expert at all actually. So I think Sister Rohi, she can share. Sister Noha.
Anyone else?
Yeah.
Has
Anyone else?
You have gone through the journey and you're still going through the journey. So you would be the best resource to answer some of these questions because of your lived experience. So
Assalamu alaikum. So yes, the organization MUHSIN, we do have trainings available. We do have some pamphlets and some information here, so please feel free to take one. There are a lot of services, alhamdulillah, that MUHSIN offers. For example, MCA, for example, right? We are trying to set up a Sunday school and we need volunteers. We have respite care and alhamdulillah, we have all you need to do is contact me, inshallah, we will share the contact information. And also, the pamphlets here, we have all the information that you need to contact. Someone from MUHSIN will contact you and the trainings will be provided. Respite services, Umrah services, alhamdulillah, MUHSIN has come a long way. And Jazakallah khair, you've got to interacting out and showing us the support. Because we feel as mothers, the most difficult thing for us to deal with is your silence. Because we understand that it's very difficult for you when you see a child with special needs. And believe me, even though I have a child with special needs, when I see another family with a child with special needs, I don't know how to interact with them. So I still have to teach myself how to interact with them. So instead of ignoring, instead of ignoring, the just come up to the parent, ask how you can help. The other thing is staring. A very difficult thing for us mothers to deal with is when you stare. So we're trying to. I always tell my friends, probably we can teach. I have 4 kids. I have 1 special needs, and I do have 3 who are neurotypical. So I teach my other kids instead of staring, smile and say salam. So a simple thing, probably we can just replace the stare with salam. So, but yeah, alhamdulillah, we do have a lot of trainings. We do have information. Inshallah, we will bring out the information. Jazakallah khair.
Any other questions?
You mentioned that Asperger's syndrome. Yeah. So you said it's high functioning. What do you mean by high functioning? And then the other question is, like you said, like even adults may have like some symptoms of autism or so. How do you deal with that? So, like for example, the college student, are they easy to approach and they come to therapy on their own, or you have to go there in person?
So in terms of Asperger's, what I mean by high functioning, and again, it's on a spectrum, right? So high functioning is on one end, low functioning, and then moderate, functioning. What we really mean by functioning is intellectual ability. Your ability, for example, to engage in class, speak to the professor, ask questions, be able to engage with the content, right? To show that you're retaining information, you're understanding. And then to be able to engage with you, so talk about different subjects, right? We talk about climate change, or we talk about, history, or whatever it might be. They can engage with you, and there's a give and take, so the conversation can be sustained. So for Asperger's, for example, the students that I work with actually all came on their own. They all recognized that there was a need there and that they were starting to struggle in class. And so as a confidential service, they come in, right? And through modeling and through dissecting and deconstructing and then reconstructing and modeling, those things can be very helpful for them to learn how to behave in public spaces and within the classroom and with friends, and also in terms of the student with his wife, right? So he's a young student who's actually married. And so again, in relation to his wife, he struggles sometimes, right? His wife struggles, for example, in terms of feeling loved by him. How do you express love and what's appropriate to express and how do you say that? And there are many ways that you can say I love you without also saying those three words. And so it's teaching that individual, empowering them, right? And not emboldening, right? There's a difference also, there's a distinction that has to be made. A lot of people think that therapy can be emboldening. It emboldens people to rebel against their loved ones, right? And sometimes that happens when the therapy is not done correctly, to turn against self and to turn against others. But empowering is for him within his marriage and within the social circles that he's in, to not turn against the people that care for him, and to not accuse them of things and to not, have further conflict with them. But it's to understand that they love you, they're trying to be there for you, your friends are trying to support you, but they just don't know how to do that, right? So they may do that in the wrong ways, but they're well-intentioned, and maybe you can also speak to them as to what works for you, right? So in terms of also an autistic adult, I would say their expression of emotions, their ability to understand that you're upset and that you no longer want to engage in a conversation. They don't know that you're upset, so they might just continue trying to speak to you. There's no limit, right? They don't see that there's a line there that, okay, maybe I should just leave her alone right now. They can't read social cues in that way. And so it really relates to social and cognitive abilities. And sometimes there are lapses in those areas that indicate to someone that perhaps there's an issue here, right? They don't understand my emotions. They can't empathize with me by expressing empathy in the way that I understand. And then their ability to engage with me on topics, right, and to go deep on topics is somewhat limited. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Assalamu alaikum. I had a quick question about I think it's called hippocampus. You said it's enlarged and it's a part that stores memories, and then you said that it means that when we talk to the child, they don't retain, can you explain this more? They don't retain the information very well. Thank you so much.
What I mean by the enlarged hippocampuses, and of course it's to varying degrees, so for some it's slightly enlarged and for some it's really enlarged, because it relates to memory storage. Sometimes I speak to mothers and they say that their struggle is that they taught their child, right, or they've taken their child to some type of services in which a therapist worked with their child, right, and taught them, modeled certain behaviors that were normative and that were appropriate socially. But then something happens in which the child goes through a stressful situation, and it's almost as though the child forgets everything. So it's likened to, I don't know if any of you have taken like hypnobirthing or Lamaze classes, right? And then when you're in actual labor, everything goes out the window. You're like, I don't care about breathing, I don't care about hypnotherapy, I don't care about any of those things right now, just give me some drugs. And so that's really how it is. It's very similar to that type of experience. So when they go through a stressful situation, it somewhat reprograms them to their default mode, and they may forget everything that they were taught, and with some gentle prompts and gentle reminders, they can come back to that awareness.
I think there's a question here that was written for Halima. So there's a question here, what advice do you give a special needs mom so their kids can be productive good Muslims as they are usually in public schools and they have difficulty saying that they are Muslims? So the question is how to raise them as good Muslims with all the challenges they are facing. What comes to my mind is the mother and the father are the expert on their child because as Hiba beautifully explained, every child is a unique situation, okay? They're not all the same. And every child has different abilities and have different abilities to understand different things. So the parents know. So what we do is we just teach whatever we think they are capable of comprehending, and we actually also train them in whatever we're doing at home because they live with us. So they see us living as Muslims, and even if you believe they're not comprehending at all, they're getting something from what they're observing you do at home. They're hearing you say we are Muslims. They're hearing you say we don't eat pork. But again, ultimately, you as the parents, you know your child, you know your abilities, their abilities. Definitely don't say to yourself, oh, my child struggles with autism, I'm not going to tell him we're Muslims. No, we're going to tell him we're Muslims and do whatever we can and see how far it goes. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you all and grant you patience and strength to, inshallah, to be able to handle the situation because it's not easy. The parenting, as it is, even if your child is not struggling with anything, is very difficult. So imagine if you have a child who is struggling with something. And I'll just end with, I talked to a few parents who have kids who are struggling with something. And one thing is common amongst all of them. They tell me, my child is a blessing in my life. And I remember the first time I heard it from a mother who had a child who was struggling with autism, and she was actually on the severe end of the spectrum of autism. And she told me she's a blessing. She has brought so many blessings to our lives. And I looked at this mother and I was very humbled. And I was in awe of her because I don't know my abilities. And here is a mother who was, subhanAllah, tested by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this very hard thing. And she's doing her best and she's doing a beautiful job. And telling me that her child is a blessing. So may Allah bless you all and grant you patience and strength to do everything that you can for your lovely, lovely children.
Jazakallah to Sister Hiba and Sister Mother. And as a token of appreciation for you being here today, we have some flowers from the MUHSIN kids.
Very nice.
Before we disperse, I would like to read a quick closing dua. So please, if you can follow me. ربنا تقبل منا انك انت السميع العليم اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الاحياء منهم والاموات انك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات اللهم لا نفرق جمعنا الا بذنب مغفور وعمل مبرور وسعي مشكور سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
الحمد لله.